Welcome to part 2 of creating the sound for the audio drama, The Most Important Passover. This is a project I did with the Audio Drama Alliance. Today we're looking at the crowds and the loop group. This had a lot of that. We'll be getting into those details. The link to listen to the full thing is in the link in the description. Why? It was so close. It's in the link in the description. Please go listen to it. It's free. Roll the intro. This was my first project that had this many crowds that were needed for it. There's some very large scenes that in your head want to hear hundreds of people in it. So I was a little worried of like, are we going to get enough of this stuff? Thankfully, the folks in the Audio Drama Alliance banded together and compiled a great source of loop group that I was able to pull from. Even though I got lots of great audio from them, I was still a little worried getting into it because it still wasn't the like hundreds and hundreds of people that I wanted to hear. So what ended up working great, I think this is typically how loop group is handled, but I was able to build up crowds from my libraries that were just kind of the body of the sound in the background, kind of creating a lot of that energy. And then all the loop group sat right on top of that in the mix so that you can hear those a little closer to you, pan them off to the sides. And it just created the illusion that everyone here is, saying the same thing, even though there may be only a few people saying certain lines here and there that were specific for each scene. So I brought everybody's audio in, their full tracks. They did a good job of slating, so I was able to break it all up by scene. And then I edited all of the kind of takes together. Sometimes there's like, first part of the scene, all of the crowds are kind of chanting a certain thing. And then later in the scene, they're saying something else. So I broke those up. So I had all those organized. And then I was able to do the painstaking process of editing everything together and getting it in each bit. But it was very satisfying once it all really comes together. It just puts you in that space and environment and back in those times, and is really cool. An important part for editing these crowds together, fairly obvious, but was just finding that like natural sound. It needed to be random, but not too random. It was just finding the right spacing, making sure the different people who were voicing weren't like too backed up together. You weren't hearing them, loudly on the left and then suddenly loudly on the right as well, for that confusion. So it's kind of finding that perfect balance of random but natural sounding, combining them to have the ebbs and flows as the crowd swells and gets louder and then kind of dies down, making them a little more sparse where it naturally sounds like it, a crowd quietening down. There's definitely some things I could have probably done in the notes that I gave to the folks who were recording the loop group to be better. That was on me. But to like have that natural die down.
Up a little bit. We arrived in Jerusalem on Preparation Day, before Sabbath. Some of Yeshua's followers were telling everyone who would listen that the rabbi was coming.
So for this scene, it starts out, I didn't have as much of the loop group in it because it was more just supposed to be kind of the ambience. They came in a lot more with some reactions. So you can hear just the loop group here.
I've been standing here for ages. How long does it take for him to take our money anyway?
And then bring in the backgrounds. And then the full mix.
From Galilee, where I live, but the tax can only be paid in local currency.
So you can hear how it just kind of sits under the bed. Character one, like his most of the stuff is at the very front, and this just layers in nicely underneath. So then we got down to where the table gets flipped over. Here's the second one.
Use this to pay my taxes.
You thief! Give that back to me! Give back to me! Let them go! Let them go! These are mine!
Those
no!
coins?
Hey, let that go!
Out
That's
of
mine!
Hey,
It's mine!
Watch it. No, these are mine. I dropped these. No,
I'm gonna give you some of that.
Get your filthy hands
They're
off
my coins!
The crowd bits down here really help support all of that. And then hear that full mix together.
He went. But I think I'm going to leave too, before the temple guards show up.
So that, perfect combination of the loop group and the backgrounds there. All worked out really well on the end. Was really happy with how all that came together. And huge thanks to everyone in the Audio Drama Alliance getting all that loop group recorded. It was a giant lifesaver, that's for sure. Some lessons and areas I realized I needed to grow in when working on the crowds and loop group for this project was when looking at a script, kind of reading between the lines of what you'll need the crowd to be saying. Maybe there's some specific lines that you need from a crowd that help cue what the rest of the crowd will be doing. That was something I got from the folks recording loop group. That was a lifesaver. I didn't realize I needed it until I got them. You're like, oh yes, this is perfect. This helps set up the story for the rest of whatever's happening in the scene. But I hadn't really thought of that beforehand. So continuing to get better to understand the story, understanding what you need between the lines, maybe from folks recording loop group. That way you have everything you need when you get to the mix, and can make it sound best you can. Stay tuned for part 3. We'll be looking at mixing the dialogue for this specific show. And again, link is in the description. The audio drama is free. Make sure to go listen to the full thing, and catch you in part 3. It's not the same tune.